Hello, welcome all for this webinar of today, 28 April. So on the next slide, we are going just to see the overview of this webinar. We will recall the aims and talk about the first release, which has actually happened on last Friday with a request for comments. We will have all the 5 existing subgroup updates, the current processes updates, and then questions and discussions. Let's go to the next slide now, and there we will have recalling the working group aims, which is to define detailed practical guidelines on data sharing under the present COVID-19 circumstances. You all know that. The aim is to help stakeholders follow best practices to maximize the efficiency and impact of their work. And second aim is to develop guidelines for policymakers to maximize timely data sharing and appropriate responses in such health emergencies. The next slide, so how do we go for these aims? First of all, practice guidelines per subgroup, and then overall guidelines with recommendations for researchers and policymakers to help maximize data sharing, a catalog of key resources to inform guidelines, key data sets, standards, tools, repositories, etc. And finally, a decision tree, a tool that will facilitate navigation to specific resources by these different stakeholders. So with that in mind, we go to the next slide. And there we have some recalling on what has happened with the first release. This did happen the 24th. It was a draft coming with an overarching introduction and the summary of the efforts of the 5 subgroups. And all of these summaries contained initial recommendations. There was also a section on research software, and all this is published on the RDA website at the link that you have here. The aim is now to have a more detailed version of all documents that will be released as work progresses. And if I go to the next slide now, we have the editorial team, and they all have worked tremendously to get this coherent document from all these different contributions. And you can see the names of the people who have been part of this editorial team, and they will continue having their meetings on Fridays for each of the releases that will be each Friday. So thanks very much to all the members of the subgroups who have worked tremendously and with their moderators to provide these documents. And thanks a lot for this editorial team who has done an amazing work to make it possible to have the first release at the planned date. On the next slide, you have some information about the request for comments. As usual in the RDA, any first output from a group is available for comments. And this is usually done using a request for comment functions for getting specific feedback. And at this stage, we don't look for very detailed feedback on the format, the words used, and so on, but more general comments, which will help informing the next releases. So the subgroups will continue to work to refine the scope, the direction, the guidelines, and start working on their different aims as they describe them. The next slide is actually a snapshot of the RDA screen for commenting. And you have here the possibility, you first have to log in into RDA. And we are really hoping that all members of the different subgroups will be able to comment on this general document and also on the work of others. Then you have the possibility to write your different comments. We have this scroll to the very end, and the last step is to enter comment and click save. Don't forget that, to submit your comments. At this stage, we do not plan to have a Google document where you can directly write in, but we really hope to have many comments from all the members of the working group of the different subgroups, and obviously from other members of RDA. The next slide is now, we are going to pass the word to Rob, who will update us with the work of the omics subgroup. So Rob?
Yes, good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Thank you very much. So the omics subgroup is the first of the 5 presenting its progress. On the next slide, you can see that we have been growing a lot since last time. There are a few more members in the group, and even more growth has been seen in the people that are actually co-authoring our recommendations. So far, we have 41 people that have put their name on the document. So this is going really well, and we would really invite everyone else, not only the 78 current members, but also other people with expertise in the omics area, to join this group and help us co-author the recommendations. You really help your colleagues finding the right kind of resources. So on the slide after this, reiterating that the omics sees itself, its own scope as everything that is in molecular biology. For the moment, we have focused on the target audience for our recommendations, that is the researchers that are producing data. So we are giving them, in our current version, concrete pointers to repositories and standards. There are a few things where we want to extend this. Last time we already said that based on the prioritized topics that are given here on the bottom, that we might want to extend that list and also go for other omics topics. But there are other directions in which we would like to grow, and that is to make the recommendations more specific to COVID-19, rather than just how to deal with omics data in a generic research project. And also we would like to extend to other stakeholders, which could include researchers that are looking for data, but also policymakers and funders. So out of the prioritized topics, 4 were mentioned last week. 3 are here. We decided to have the host immunity into the merge that into our genetics. So there are several different types of analysis under host genetics that are listed there, and we welcome every suggestion there again. For structural data, our documentation was not yet ripe enough for the release. So there we are also looking still for input. On the final slide for the omics group, we do the call for contributions. So we would like to let you know that our writing continues 24/7. So please, if you have expertise in the omics, come help author our guidelines, and you can do that at any time of the day. And reach out to either Natalie or me to get our help and guidance if you don't know where to look. And also continue suggesting omics resources that are available anywhere. We currently have 64 omics entries in Zotero, and we welcome any pointers to more resources. Our group meetings are on Thursday. So next one is this Thursday at midday UTC. There is an option for people that are in the Pacific, on both sides of the Pacific, which is at 0:30 UTC on Friday morning, which of course then means that in the Pacific it is still Thursday. All the details can be found on the omics events listing on the website. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. And now we will go to the next subgroup, which I think is the clinical subgroup. And I pass the word to Davey, who will present the slides of the group.
Okay, thanks. And can you go to the next slide? And this is our current group members. And if you can go to the next slide. And so our subgroup goals are still the same, is generate the data sharing guidelines and compile a list of resources focused on COVID-19 and develop the data decision tree strategies to navigate the resources. We're not developing the tools. We want to put the decision tree development in mind when we're collecting the resources. Next slide. And so these other topics are in scope and out of scope of our subgroup. And the topics colored in red are the ones that we had discussions during our group calls. And they are the basis for our first round recommendations. And we hope to extend to other topics in the future. Next slide. So based on that two topics, we have 3 areas that are carved out in our recommendations and some recommendations on how to conduct clinical trials and then how to share the data generated by those activities. And in our group, I also want to pay attention to the trustworthy sources. Because during the pandemic times, and we recommend that to focus on the limited resources, time, and efforts on the reliable and high quality data if possible. And so the detailed recommendations can be accessed on at the Google Doc with the link on the slide. Next slide. And I want to just give a very highlight overview of what the recommendation that we have in the document. And first is to have standardized agreement among all parties to expedite the data sharing. And we think the current tools probably is not enough. We need more tools to collecting data, especially that there are some tools may have to extract data while the people are busy, cannot really put the data into the nice format. And then there's maybe a portal that can help centralize the resources that people know are important, and then to associate with the good metadata to increase the quality and reusability of the data, and then make a timely publication of the data. And the last but not least is that we want to share both positive and negative data. Next slide. So in terms of trustworthy sources, definitely they should play an important role in the data sharing. However, I think we discussed that the trustworthy, the definition is maybe varies from domains to domains. So we want to be open-minded that that can be defined by certification or some other criteria. Next slide. So this is the strategy I talked about, that there was some the big areas that we want to kind of classify the resources, and then for each for each of the categories, like a clinical like the data repositories, that maybe have further classifications, and then that hopefully that will help people navigate the resources. Next slide. So we have further defined the roles in our group, and on the slide you can see the names associated with the different activities. And I want to point out that the clinical trial data that the recommendations mainly produced by Sergio and Christian, and we're benefit from the clinical experience from Sergio, and also the recommendations are built on top of some work Christian led maybe 1 or 2 years ago, and have a lot of recommendations already out there for sharing clinical data, but 2 of them really kind of trying to curate the data that related, that pick out the things that relate to COVID-19. And another thing that I want to point out, that we have now 71 entries in the Zotero, and then we have I mentioned names on the slide, but there's a lot of names that also in the meeting minutes that we have. Next slide. So the next step for us is that we want to further define the recommendations, and one thing I think is stand out to us is that during our discussions we don't have actually the real users for those recommendations, and so that's the things that we're looking for, that who actually can use the recommendations, and maybe we can like experiment that, and then to sharpen the recommendation to make it more actionable. And then last is not least is the we're going to have our subgroup meeting tomorrow, and as the time is posted on the slide, and also the link, and we'll welcome anyone who have interest to join us. And so our goal is that April 30th we'll have a refined document, and make hopefully the second release on May 1st.
Thank you very much. So now we will go for the next group, which is epidemiology. Is it Claire presenting?
Yes, good morning, afternoon, everybody. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. We have 79 members now, and I thank everybody for their interest and participation. We are now working on our 4th writing sprint to prepare the second draft release, and we're planning to have that ready for the editorial team early Thursday morning, give you time to get it organized for Friday release. We meet 3 times a week. I'm showing the times there to give a break to those in Australia who have to stay up late. We may change the time moving forward. Next slide, please. So we work very much in Google Drive. We have a number of documents. I won't repeat what I said last week. We now have a new document, of course, for the current writing sprint, which I'll explain shortly. And with the first release recommendations, we sent out a survey monkey to collect, to register people's agreement or disagreement with the first release recommendations, which were overwhelmingly in agreement. I think there was one person quibbled a little bit with one of the recommendations. Next slide, please. So for the second release, we will carry over the entirety of the first release document, and in addition, for this second release, we're going to focus on building out recommendation number 3, which the short version was rapid development of a consensus standard for surveillance data. So what we're going to do now is look more specifically at the information or data elements that should be collected for COVID-19 epidemiology data sets. And I hope that we're going to have the time to better curate the epidemiology key resources in Zotero. Next slide, please. The Zotero library, I'm very happy to see that it has become becoming increasingly popular across the different subwork groups. There are now 65 people who have joined the Zotero library and are contributing. Maybe not 65 people contributing, but there are a lot of contributions. We now have 315 actually references, 170 something more references or resources than there were last week. The next step will be to assemble a small group of people across maybe 1 or 2 people from each working group to form a management group for Zotero, clean it up, standardize the tags. And my feeling at the moment, contrary to last week, was that we should delay the public release until the library is properly curated. Next slide, please. So we have 79 members of the working group, 1 more than last week. 8 more have come than last week, so 36 in all completed the membership survey. You can see the attendance at our weekly meetings, 3 times a week meetings. There are 19 people who have registered their agreement or disagreement with the first release recommendations, and 18 people who have contributed in one way or another to the work of the work group, and I thank all of them from the bottom of my heart for their contributions. You can see their names there. Next slide, please.
Thank you very much, Claire, for this epidemiology subgroup overview. Now we will go to the social subgroup, and I think it's Irena who's going to present.
Yes, hello. I would also like to start thanking all people who are members of our working group, whom you can see on the next slide. And if we could go to the next one, please. That's our progress up to date. Special thanks to the members of our writing sprints. These are people who added their names to the documents. If some of you contributed, but your names are missing, please let me know. Thanks again. We now have short recommendations and longer guidelines, which are open for comments. These are Google Docs. Short recommendations are the same as you read in the first release recommendations, and longer guidelines are listed on the homepage of our subgroup. So we are soliciting comments, and we already received some to short recommendations and to longer ones, and we'll address them in our meeting, and we'll continue with our weekly meetings, which are every Thursday, same time as today. And if you could please click on the next slide. So we slightly refined our scope, and you can also see it in the first release of recommendations. And the next one, please. These are some of the topics that we'd like to address in the next version of the guidelines, because we talked a bit about ensuring equity and vulnerable populations, stigma, indigenous populations were the topics that we highlighted as very important, but we didn't have time to address them in details yet. So that's something that we'll be working on in the coming week. And then there was also very good Priyanka's question that we should consider how data collected from vulnerable populations result in a more equitable response to pandemic. We also have some bits of text which were written by our working group members but haven't been included in short or longer version of guidelines, so we might want to consider repurposing them into checklists, fact sheets, and we also received requests from a couple of social sciences projects that are working with COVID-19 data, asking whether their strategies for making data available are right. So maybe use cases like Dave mentioned or checklist for such projects could also be something that we'll be working on in the coming weeks. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Now we will hear about the community participation work group, and I think it's Joanne who is going to talk for the group. Or not?
I think Joanne's here, so maybe she can unmute. Or it's looking actually like she's not got audio there. So maybe I'll do it, and if you want to add into chat, or if anyone else from the group wants to step in, by all means do. So we've got a few moderators on the group, and as you'll see, there are links to various aspects of the group, so the general web pages and the information if you want to get involved. So if you just skip to the next page. So like the other groups, we have several members in the working group, and various people have been involved in the different writing sprints. So thank you very much to for the members to getting involved in that. And then the main progress to date, like the other groups, we've been pulling together initial recommendations and details on the scoping. So what we're meaning by community participation is the gathering of data from the community. So the use of different apps or ways that people can submit data related to COVID. So if they're tracking, their own health, or if you're using kind of Bluetooth tracking to try and help with the surveillance. So we've got some initial guidelines which you can see through the Google Doc link there. And as I said, we've had contributions from moderators and various people in the group, so thanks for those. We've asked people to continue in a suggest mode so we can see the new changes and help with iterating on the next versions. And the approach we're taking is to look at one use case at a time. So we're focusing this week on app development and looking at the type of data that's gathered through these apps, and also the considerations to make in terms of the reuse and the storage of that data. So if you skip to the next page, you'll see details about when you can get involved in that writing sprint. You can contribute at any time if the time we've proposed tomorrow doesn't suit you, but we will all be online tomorrow at 2 UTC, so late in the afternoon. We have a Zoom set up which we've sent round the group, so you can come and join in the writing then. As with the other groups, we've also been gathering resources on the Zotero library. So you'll see various things tagged for our group there. And there's instructions, if you aren't familiar with that, there's instructions on the mailing list and on our group Slack of how to contribute. And we've also been discussing, this is something we'll raise across all the moderators, about how we can reuse that data, how we can pull out certain standards and index them in fair sharing as well. I think that's the main updates from us.
Thank you very much. So thanks to all the 5 subgroups for this update. And as you have heard before, there are some cross-cutting activities in this working group. And on the next slide, we have actually one element or one activity around research software. And with this research software is now created as a new subgroup, which is transversal. And who is going to talk about this activity? Is it Ingrid or?
No, I think Hugh is going to do that.
Okay, I'm going, oh, okay, yeah. So.
Hugh Shanahan, is that?
I think it's actually Michelle Barker.
Oh, okay. I'm wondering whether they're able to speak if they're not in as a panelist. Oh no, Hugh is here.
Can you hear me there?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
So
Great.
you can
okay.
come onto the slide. Yeah, thanks.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay. Well, hello everybody.
Sorry, you can play. I just thought I had to speak, but I don't. You can play.
All right. Okay, so this is a very, very brief update. Now, the first thing to note is that we don't have a nice set of pages of describing member lists or here are our sessions and so on, because it's only been in the last 12 hours or so, I think, where there was where we got a thumbs up to say that there will be a that we are a different subgroup. So just to note, we will be putting those things in place. We're just trying to get we're just starting. Now that said, we've managed to get a number of things done in the last 2-3 weeks. So in the first instance, a report has been provided in the initial report, which is providing some very kind of broad guidelines for researchers on how to make your software available and so on. These are quite broad and not specific to the different subgroups. The references for that there have also been included in Zotero in terms of the with a software tag. The thing I should also note is that this activity is been enabled by a huge amount of input from the Research Software Alliance. So we have one of the other moderators of this subgroup is Michelle Barker, who I think is actually here, and Fotis Psambolis, who's also a member of RDA. So Michelle is actually chair of the director of RDA as well. So we've done that, provided that first sort of 2-page document, which is providing broad guidelines. What we're working on for this week is developing an equivalent set of guidelines for policy developers. Then following sort of once we have those guidelines for the policy developers finished, we'll probably go back to a more detailed set of practical guidelines for researchers, again, that's sort of across fields. Within, for example, the omics subgroup, there's a call there to say, okay, we need to develop text for specifically talking about software within the subgroup. So there we need to contribute. Again, also, and there's a link to that on the slide deck in terms of an initial decision tree, in which again sort of match up those broad guidelines we discussed that have been released initially. Now, going forward, there are multiple challenges, but the two that I guess have sort of jumped out initially is, first of all, is ensuring that we recruit more specialists for the individual subgroups to advise on software, really kind of burying down into, what's good, for example, the omics group and so on. There's also the questions such as, are we focusing on continuing to provide more sort of specialist recommendations, or should we be doing other activities like providing example computational workflows in various tasks for people to go forward there? But as you said, this is where we are right now. We're very, very new, so my apologies that we're just kind of presenting you with one slide at the present moment.
Thank you very much. So now we have a next slide, please, which highlights another cross-cutting domain, which is around legal and ethical frameworks. And there is a team of between 50 and 20 people that are distributed across the existing subgroups who had a first meeting held yesterday. And the aim of this meeting was to delineate cross-cutting aspects, which has been widely discussed, to agree on structuring a contribution in specifically two ways or two sets. General principle in the overarching document of the guidelines, underlining specifically the 5 SAFEs framework, which seem to be has been used for the social science subgroup, but seem to be adapted to many of the others. And then the specific chapter, which is chapter 10 in the existing first release document, that will be structured in according to different aspects of the different norms, and we want to avoid, although the resources will be in the catalog, in Zotero, we want to avoid to have just a jungle of complicated legal or ethical framework documents, but we already insisted on the fact of having a good way of having the navigation in these resources adapted to the different stakeholders. So to continue this work, and we hope to have a document with at least for the overarching part and for this chapter 10, something for the next release by Friday. A new subgroup has been just created in RDA, like the other subgroups. A call for the moderators has been sent across these 15 or 20 people, and 2 of them already have volunteered to have this role of moderator. They are Alexander Bernier from Canada and Brian Pickering from UK. They are active in Alexander in the omics subgroup, and Brian more specifically in the social science subgroup. So maybe another one, but we have for the moment these 2 proposed moderators. The subgroup has been created on the RDA website. You have the link at the bottom of the slide. And of course, if you are interested, you can join this subgroup. The subgroup will have a meeting on Thursday, 30 April at 8:30 p.m. Universal time. And that would be the moment when we have, there will be a first document ready to send for the second release that will document this rather empty chapter number 10 in the next round. So that's where we are for the moment, and I hope that for the next webinar there will be the moderators able to report on the work of this new transversal subgroup. So the next slide is the update on the timeline. So the first release of guideline and recommendation has been the 24th of April. The second release is planned for the 1st of May. This has already been repeated during this webinar. The third and the fourth releases are planned for the 8th and the 15th of May. And what we call the final drafts release is planned for the 22nd of May. There will be a call for community comments, and the feedback period will extend between the 22nd of May and the 5th of June. For getting to the finalized final release, which is planned for 5-12 June, 2 weeks for the recommendation, and then they will be ready for endorsement by the RDA Council around the 12th of June. So that's where we stand with the plan for the timeline. Next slide. now we have finished with what was planned just to explain and expose in this webinar, and now we are ready to get your questions. Like for the previous webinar, you please ask your questions through the question and answer domain, and they will be monitored and addressed. And we hope to be able to answer most of your questions during this webinar. Time is limited, and the next webinar will be on Tuesday, May 5 at the same time as today, 11 Universal Time. So thank you very much for listening, and now we go to the questions.
Thanks, Anne. Yeah, so we do have a couple of questions, and maybe since we're at the question period, we'll look to answer them all live through the audio. Dawe, did you, I'm not sure if you had, there was a question about consent, whether you or Andrew or somebody on the clinical group had a response for that, or maybe you've already typed one in.
Yeah, I saw, I think we answered in the question and answer box, and that's certainly an important topic for clinical subgroup. And I think Dan probably will join the call tomorrow to talk about it.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Christian relating the overlapping aspects between the different subgroups. And this specifically mentions data management plans, document identifiers, data use agreements, etc. So the question is, how will these be handled? And maybe I'll just kind of take a first stab at that and then see if anybody else wants to chime in. I think those kinds of overarching issues will be dealt in one of two ways. One is, as you'll see in the first release, there is a kind of overarching recommendation section, which is one place where there could be recommendations regarding things like data management plans. The other way, as Anne has highlighted and Hugh and others have spoken to, is for larger kind of cross-cutting issues like legal and ethics and research software. That those would be dealt with separate groups, creating separate sections in the guidelines document. Anybody else want to add to that cross-cutting piece?
No, I think, Anne speaking, I think that it's exactly like you explained, and we have seen these two new transversal subgroups for software and ethical and legal, and some other subgroups are welcome to propose themselves if this become necessary between the subgroups. So highlighting the cross-cutting areas is an important thing that can be done after each release.
Okay, and another question, or it's a comment, I suppose, for the ethical legal cross-cutting group is looking at governmental regulation would be necessary in that context. So that's a comment or suggestion for the ethics legal group.
Yes, we in the first call yesterday, there was some discussion about that and how to make a sort of hierarchy of the different norms, going from the very international ones, the highly ethical principle first, then the international regulation, and then, of course, that can be actually a recommendation to have a specific national measures taken in the context of COVID-19 to be clearly highlighted at the national level, so that it's easy to navigate, and we will point to those.
And then another question is relating to the kind of the different stakeholder groups and the nature of the releases. So the question essentially asks, when would the recommendations for researchers be available and policymakers? And I think, again, the goal is that both those two groups and other stakeholders would be addressed in the same overarching document and subgroup recommendations. So those elements and those stakeholders will be addressed in the full document sent, and also in the decision tree that is a future deliverable. So that would allow a policymaker to kind of drill down based on their stakeholder group.
If I can add something on this question, there was also a discussion in the ethical legal subgroup around for researchers, for example, researchers collecting data, then recommendation for researchers managing data, researchers wanting to use data. So even among researchers, there are groups of stakeholders, and it would be nice in the end product to be able, according to what you are looking for, to rather precisely point to specific recommendations.
All right, I don't see any other comments or questions. Maybe just ask if anybody else from the co-chairs or moderators wants to make any final comments. And if not, I'd like to thank Anne Campbell Thompson for chairing this webinar and kicking it off. Anne, did you have other comments?
I just wanted to, and I think I can do that on behalf of all the co-chairs and moderators, to really thank all these people who very quickly motivated themselves and very efficiently contributed to the different subgroups, so that, and then encourage them to continue, because we are aiming at more practical tools and guidelines, and I'm sure we can count on everybody. Thank you very much.
All right, and I'm just sending a final suggestion to Monday, who's indicated that they're not part of the groups. So if you're able to send me a note, an email Monday, I just put my email in the response to your question. And you can also see it in the list of co-chairs, and let me know what groups you'd like to join, and we'll get that looked after. All right. That's it then. Thank you, Anne, and colleagues that have presented and taken part today. We look forward to seeing you again same time next week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.